I grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I was born in a small town called Leland, Mississippi. My mother, she moved to a beautiful community called Hot Springs when I was just a toddler. And she picked a beautiful place. She really did, known for promenades and hot baths and bathhouse row. So we grew up in a beautiful community, and we drank a lot of hot water that came just bubbling up from the ground. My mother worked very hard, and when we were growing up, just little kids, she would go to work and she would send us to Head Start. And in Head Start, we learned our manners, how not to put your elbow on the table. We learned how, which forks to use. And I can't remember the woman who taught me that because I was so young. But we also learned how to read and write. So I learned to read and write at a very young age. And my mother always emphasized education. She emphasized God first, and she also emphasized getting a good education. So before the age of 5, I was already doing my little reading and writing, and I can remember sitting on a hill in the projects and writing poetry, my first little lines of poems. And I'm one of 7 children. I have 5, there are 5 girls and 2 boys, and we were always very close. So my mother was a single parent up until I was 7 years old. So she was a nurse. She worked at Timex at a factory. She did odd jobs here and there. In between, when there were layoffs, we would be on welfare. But what I remember about growing up is that we really did not have much. You don't know that till you get to a certain age. So when we were really little kids, I didn't really know how poor we were because everybody around us in the projects, we were all on the same level. And I grew up in a town where they had the black projects and the white projects. And in the black projects, there were no white families. But in the projects where I grew up, they called it the white projects because there were white people who were poor too and who also were on welfare and single mothers. And so we all came up together. And that was my first introduction to diversity. And Mama used to tell us that it was important to love everybody and to treat people right. A few months before graduation in high school, my counselor came to me and said, "Where are you going to college?" And I said, "I have no idea. I haven't thought about college. I've been working. I worked at Wendy's full time. I threw myself into every single club and organization that I could. I was a cheerleader and went to all the games. And in the summertime, I worked 72 hours. I was part of the Summer of Opportunity program for 32 hours a week, and I worked 40 hours, saving money for the future because we were trained to save something. And a few months before high school graduation, my counselor said, "You're an undergraduate. You've got an advanced diploma. Where are you going to college?" And I said, "Nobody's talked to me about going to college. But I always was interested in University of Arkansas. I guess I could go there, but we don't have any money." So he said, "Well, your grades, you're in the top 5% of the high school class. There are a few scholarships left, and I believe you can go to college." And I applied for scholarships, and there was a Langston scholarship for $500, was one of the only ones left, was for an African American student. I applied, wrote an essay, won that, and with $500 and plus one other small scholarship, I was accepted to the University of Arkansas. I also applied to a traditional black college and was accepted for a full scholarship. My mother said that it was always important to work with people, all colors, all races, and that she did not believe that it would be the best thing for me to go to a college where I wouldn't be experiencing all kinds of people, because she said when you get in the real world, you're going to work with all kinds of people and you have to love all kinds of people. And so instead of taking the full scholarship, I went to the University of Arkansas. And because of that, I had to work all the way through college. I worked, my family wasn't able to help, so I joined the military. So while I was studying political science, that was my major, I joined the military at the end of my freshman year with a mind to become a photojournalist and a writer. I looked at Peter Jennings on the news. He would travel and tell stories, and I thought, you know, I can travel and tell stories. Martin Luther King Jr., he was an orator and a preacher and all these things, so all of that was in me. And so I set out to become a journalist in the military while I studied politics in college. I thought in college that one day I'm going to go home to Hot Springs and I'm going to become the mayor of that city. I'm going to run that town and I'm going to help the poor. I'm going to help African Americans do better, help us get jobs, because it was so hard in those days to get a job. So my initial thinking was to become a mayor and maybe do a little journalism in the military. However, at the end of my sophomore year, for the first time in college, I had a professor who came to me in my creative writing 2 class, and she said, you wrote this essay? It was an essay about growing up without my real dad and how I went as a teenager to find him. I said, yes, I wrote this essay. And she said, you need to be a writer. You have got to write. Have you thought about journalism? And I said, in college, no, I really hadn't thought about it. I was working so much, I hadn't even thought about that I could actually be a professional journalist. I thought I'd just do a little bit in the military. So that was how I doubled and combined my major. So I ended up studying political science and journalism, and I earned a bachelor's degree from the J. William Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Arkansas in 1988. As soon as I finished college, just before that, I had an advisor, Mr. Reed, who came to me and he talked about this newspaper that was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and he talked about some smaller papers. I had only done one internship, and that was at the Springdale News in Springdale, Arkansas, and I loved that. Gannett owned the newspaper in Little Rock, and so I started there about a month out of college, and on January 29th, 1988, I started at the Arkansas Gazette, oldest newspaper west of the Mississippi River. Gannett is the only news organization that I have worked for. In the early 90s, I had a friend who was a reporter. Her name was Carla Johnson Kimbrough. And she had a mind to start a chapter. She said, you know, we should come together and start a professional journalism chapter for black journalists. And I said, okay, I'll be one of the people to help with that. And we worked hard. We went to Philander Smith College, and we did some interviews there that were published on television. We had something published in the newspaper, and we started a chapter. And we were very proud to host a regional meeting of the National Association of Black Journalists. Oh my gosh, we were proud. While I was in Florida, I started there on the copy desk, but I got my first promotion into management as an editor who worked in the field because they asked me, what are you interested in? I went into a management training program, and I got to be on the editorial board. I got to work with the publisher and the editor and have a voice, and then begin to use some of the things that I had learned as a student. I started a program called the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Project with one of my best mentors ever, Tom Callanan. And so he had a vision for ways to really reach a polarized community by working with students and going into the schools. And so some of this thinking I applied, some of it he applied, but we would brainstorm and work together on that, and then I would go out into the community and write columns about it and help mentor students. So through that mentoring, it appeared on the cover of Editor and Publisher magazine. Keith Moyer at the time was the editor in Rochester, New York, and he was here and he saw the Editor and Publisher magazine cover, and I'm not sure, I hadn't seen him in 2 years, but he had been the editor at the Little Rock newspaper. And within a couple of weeks I was on a plane. Not long after that, I had a job here and was moving here. And I came in as the assistant managing editor for News 2000. I had like a first career and a second career. Mm-hmm. In my first career, I was an assistant managing editor for training for News 2000, thinking ahead about how to work with the community, and I always liked working with people. And so my first few years, that's what I did. In 1998, I was in my second pregnancy because as soon as I got here, within 6 months, I met my husband.
When I first met Cynthia, it was a great experience. We met at my parents' church. I grew up in the city of Rochester in a ministry that was 35 years old. And Cynthia came from down south. She had moved up here from Fort Myers, Florida. And I couldn't believe that someone would come from Fort Myers, Florida with that beautiful sunshine that she enjoyed down there to Rochester where it was freezing cold. Because when she came up here, it was 3 degrees.
Within 6 or 7 months, we were married.
This was over some 20 years ago. We've been married over 2 decades.
And I started a family. So from 1998 to 2003, I was home with my children.
And 3 beautiful children came out of it.
So when I came back, I got a phone call to come back and just meet some of the new people at the Democrat and Chronicle. And after being gone a few years, I was doing church work and missionary work and raising the children. And so I pretty much had put journalism behind me, but I got an interesting phone call from Sebby Wilson Jacobson, who she invited me to lunch, invited me to come and meet Jane Suter and Karen Magnuson, who were running the Democrat and Chronicle at that time in 2003. So some years had gone by. And when I came back, I didn't even have an email address. When they said, send your resume, we like you, we have, maybe you can come and work on the copy desk and start as a temp. So actually my supervisor, who I report to now, Richard Moss, he is the one who called me back to work in 2003 to work for the holidays on the copy desk. And so that gave Karen Magnuson, who is now my mentor, a chance to see what I was made of, that I knew what I was doing, and she is a big supporter of diversity. And so she was also seeking to make sure that there was balance in the newsroom and in our report. So she said to me at the end of my first and second temp term, she said, I have a position open. It's on the Our Towns team, and I know your background is in management, but maybe this is somewhere where you can kind of get your feet wet again in a full-time job position after being gone. And so I said, Our Towns? So I felt, and on the inside, I thought, is this like me starting all over again? But on the outside, I thought, Our Towns is a wonderful product. The things from my early career of loving people and wanting to work with people and getting to do a community job in Our Towns, and then along with the digital journalism that was emerging at the time, those things got me really excited. Like, how can I marry the three of these and make this something that is really special where I can stand out and get back into management? So my whole mission was to become a manager again. I'm like, I have to prove to them. I've got to prove to them that I know what I'm doing. So that was, I felt it was my challenge. In 2006, 2 years after returning to the Democrat and Chronicle, Karen Magnuson and Tracy Bauer promoted me into a management job position. That position was called the Assistant Multimedia Editor for Community Interactivity. It was the longest title I had ever had. 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago now, in Rochester, New York, we also helped found the Rochester Association of Black Journalists with the first president, Maidstone Mulanga, and just to be a part of that association that would help so many journalists. People like me who needed a helping hand and needed to network and communicate, and who were African American. That was something that is, I think, a crowning moment in my career. I love managing people, but I love being with people and hearing the feedback, and also interviewing and just kind of feeling people out to see what they feel really matters and what do they think we should be focusing on. So my take on it is a little different from when I was a reporter, which is objective reporting and balanced, and so I managed that process. But in social media, this is the new town square. So it's a chance for me to share what I'm reading, what I care about, what the Democrat and Chronicle is doing, why that's important, and to actually tap people for perspectives and just little tidbits of information that help with being social versus just sharing a report.
Definitely, I've evolved as a columnist, I believe, the past few years, and Cynthia's played a big part in that. She does challenge me in a very positive way to always better myself, better my writing, seek diversity in my sources, and tell stories that might not necessarily be told.
In our newsroom, I oversee the east side of Monroe County, as well as the west side content. Also Ontario County, which is a key area where we have rapidly growing communities, particularly Victor, but all of Ontario County. In addition to that, I'm also over our Generation X task force that just grew out of a mission to grow audience and to also grow revenue. Before January, I was working for corporate as part of the local digital solutions network, and my job is part of the new newsroom called the Newsroom of the Future, where we empower communities to connect and we empower communities to act and to thrive. And part of my job as community content editor is to help make that happen and lead the charge, particularly with freelance and with blogs, and also with our suburban enterprise.
What else we have happening today?
Based downtown, actually B Sharp did a really good story not too long ago.
My management style is assertive. I'm nice, but I'm assertive. So, Ruth Taylor Carter, and I saw you had kind of weighed in on that with your expertise. My style is to value the various opinions in the room,
You know, sum the whole thing up in like 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
to listen to what each employee has to share.
So that'll start this week, and then, like I said, elections, and then I think I'm going to pick one or two months for you.
We have a team that's working diligently to prepare our library for the move, because we will be moving. We're selling the building, and we will be moving next year. So we're sorting through every single photograph to determine whether or not these are photographs that we will digitize and drop into our archives. And but to be the decision maker.
So have you seen the, well, we have everything, here's the challenge, so we keep that right up top.
And I get
That people
results.
have. Right now, we just want to get people talking about racism and other things in the community, so that's what the page is all about. We'll constantly update the Unite Rochester page, along with our usual stuff, opinions and things of that nature.
And to be the leader,
Application.
and not to be afraid to make the tough decisions.
This is pretty unprecedented for us, Cynthia, I think.
It is.
this is
I've never seen us do anything like this. And it just is kicking off. So
Yeah.
I think we'll be able to measure and check metrics
Yep.
and see exactly how the engagement is going. We can look at Facebook Insights.
Yep.
And this is part of what you'll be doing.
Right.
And also to address conflict. I think any good leader is able to tackle conflict and come to some resolutions. When we have readers and we're posting information online and in print and on all these platforms 24/7, obviously people aren't going to like everything that we post. So one of my roles as a manager is to support the journalists in the room, and also to make sure that we are following our ethics and our values and the principles of journalism, the principles and the code of social media, and that we're sticking with the guidelines, and our people do that. In my career, race has been a factor multiple times, not only in coverage, but in being a black journalist. But you know, I wake up every day and bring to my job position every bit of professionalism that I can, and it's always been that way. And some people cannot be controlled. No, we can't control people and determine ideologically where these people came from, besides what we've read and have gotten to know about them. But I will say that from the early days of my career, I've been called the N-word in many different ways while doing various stories. One of my first memories of racism, and I was shocked, was when I answered the telephone at the newspaper in Little Rock, and this woman on the other end in the features department, she said, "I need to speak to that little Negro girl who's sitting at the front desk." I said, "Oh my God, like really?" I said, "Did you just say Negro?" I dropped the phone. And literally there were reporters sitting near me, white reporters, who said, they were like, "What's wrong?" Because I was embraced. Even in the South, even in the newsroom here in Florida, the racism that can exist, I didn't really experience that outright in the newsroom. So, but when it came to racism, I experienced it when doing stories or when answering the phone. My first big break, when I graduated from college, I lived in my hometown. I moved back home until I could save a little money. I started out making only $5 an hour with a journalism degree. And so I didn't have much money. I didn't know what people should be paid, but I was a clerical worker. So I took the job. But I worked really hard, and I drove 55 miles back and forth each day to go to my job. And when a reporter couldn't come in because of the weather or something like that, I would say, pick me, I'll do the story. My first big break was to do the debutante story at a country club. And so I go out there with my best little outfit on, and I come armed with my pen and paper, having talked to a reporter about what to do, getting some peer instruction. And I get to the country club, and the woman tells me, oh, no, I said, excuse me? She said, there's no way you could ever have been a debutante. And there's no way you are going to be doing our story. We don't allow black people to do our, and I thought, oh my God. So I called my managing editor and I said, this woman refuses to allow me to do her story. And this was in 1988. So he said to her, I didn't hear the conversation, but the next thing you know, the woman calls me in and says, oh, we'll be glad to have you do our story. And I get to meet all the debutantes. The girls were beautiful, they were wonderful, they were all white, and I fit right in. You know, I know people, all races, it was not a problem for me, but it was a problem for the woman over the event. So what I found out when I got back to the newsroom was that my managing editor, he got on that phone and he let her know, if you ever want another story for this paper, then you are going to let our reporter in. So I learned early on that how important it is to back up your people when you know they're right. When you know somebody is right, you should back them 150%. If they're wrong, they're wrong, and you have to call them on that. But when people are right and they have done nothing wrong, I did nothing but be black. And that's one of my experiences, and there is a long list of them. But any journalist coming into this profession, regardless of race, Asians, African Americans, Latinos, white journalists, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, no matter what your culture, your heritage, your background, we all have to stand for what is right. And what I learned from my managing editor back then was, this debutante story is not as important. Our relationship with you and what you go out and say about us is not as important as our young journalists whom you just insulted. My family means everything to me. And my husband, Jeff, is a pastor. He founded our church, which is called Rebirth Ministries.
Hallelujah, we are trying to be in all of our ways, but we can do nothing without you. And Father, we pray that you will stop by and bless us on today.
I founded the ministry 7 years ago. Cynthia and I had worked in ministry together in my parents' ministry, so it was nothing uncommon for us to collaborate and work together. And it's a joy working with her. She is, again, an awesome woman of God, and she's an awesome speaker as well. And so I enjoy the co-ministry together.
He put in us some good things, and he values faith. We value money, he values faith.
He grew up here in Rochester. He's a native, grew up in the city, lived on Brown Street for many years. And he's one of the best gospel drummers in Western New York.
call the First Lady, but she's like really the assistant pastor.
Can we just worship the Lord? I will look to the hills, from whence cometh my help. Come on, shout my help. My help. It comes from the Lord. Does your help come from the Lord?
And we have 3 children together. So our first baby came along in '96. We had another one in '98, another one in 2000. They call them stair-step babies. And so my daughter Sydney, she has her first job. She's 19 years old, and she's a sophomore studying childhood psychology at St. John Fisher College. Our daughter Jasmine, she would love to go to U of R. She's being pursued quite heavily by Harvard and Dartmouth, and she's having her interviews. She won an International Writing Award actually this year, and it came with a little check. So we're very proud of her. She's 17 years old and a senior at Aquinas. My son is 15 years old, and he is a student at Greece Olympia. And he's a drummer just like his dad. It's Jeff Jr. He doesn't want to be called Junior anymore, though. But he's a really good drummer, very sharp young man. He loves the internet as well, like a lot of young men do. But he also is a singer. All 3 of the kids sing.
Every praise to our
They're wonderful. I love being a mom.
And she's a great mom, a great example of a professional woman. She's dedicated to her career. She's very career-minded and very focused on the betterment of the company, and she tries to do things that will adequately and properly represent the Democrat and Chronicle in the Rochester area. They're very fortunate to have her.
I love young journalists, and you know, my thinking is, if journalism could help a person like me, someone who really had to dream, I felt like growing up that all of us, you know, in my household, we had to dream our way and pray our way into whatever God had for us through gentle teaching and a gentle guiding hand of my mother. And so when I think about other journalists, and I think about the poverty in Rochester, and I think about the Poverty Initiative and the importance and relevance of initiatives like that, which the Democrat and Chronicle, I love that we have a poverty series. I love that we have Unite Rochester, which is a very important ongoing community leadership initiative. And I would advise to aspiring journalists that they care about the people, but also in light of accuracy and making sure that they're fair and balanced in how they do things. You can't allow what you think about people to become a part of your report. You have to be objective, and you just have to ensure that no matter where you're coming from, that you're doing what's right. My mother, she died in 2013, and my sister also died. My oldest sister passed the same year, 2 months apart. So in memory of them, I give in memory of them. My mother believed in giving. She ran a tight ship. She believed in the love of Jesus Christ. And so even now, these years later, I try and keep alive what I was taught as a child.